Thank you for listening to the Open Discourse podcast. I'm Charles Mitchell, co-founder and CEO of the Open Discourse Coalition. In this series, I interview thought leaders, elected officials, entrepreneurs, and other change agents. Today, I'm joined once again by Bill Gruver, Senior Fellow at the ODC, for the first of many Great Issues conversations. Bill, appropriately, you are the first person to come back to the Open Discourse podcast, and what I'm hoping we can do today is a variant on a new experiment that you pioneered in your leadership seminar last fall, the Great Issues Night. Can you give a little background to our listeners on what that is, and then we'll have our own Great Issues session?
Yeah, and thanks for making me the first guest in this new iteration. One of the beauties of ODC that you and I have talked about over the years is that we're an innovation engine for higher education, because we're so entrepreneurial. We can try things, and if they work, we try to scale them, and if they don't work, we throw them out. This is one of those experiments. So the Great Issues Night last fall came about for two reasons. One was the seminar's topic is the history, theory, and practice of leadership. And leadership, just by its very nature, leads one into, while studying leadership, touching on certain third rail topics to see how leaders address them. And in the first few years we did the seminar, I noticed that we touch on the third rail topic and discussion on the topic apart from leadership and how the leader we were studying addressed it, but getting into the substance of the topic. But we never had enough time, because the purpose of the seminar was studying leadership. We couldn't stay long enough on the topic, and we had to move off back to the study of leadership. So last fall, I took one of the class sessions and called it Great Issues Night. That's the second thread that I'll get to in a minute. And told the students, we're going to talk about third rail topics that you're anxious to talk about, but haven't, for one reason or another, been able to discuss on campus. I gave them a reading assignment of George Washington's Rules of Civility. And I said, that'll be the only ground rules for our discussions. There'll be no raised voices, no name calling, the same ethos we try to have throughout the seminar. And you saw the reviews. It was the highlight of the seminar. Kids who spent a lot of time together, teammates on Div 1 athletic teams who are locked up in long bus rides and hotels with plenty of downtime and plenty of time to discuss these things. I was uncomfortable even bringing up this topic. And we talked about immigration, we talked about capital punishment, we talked about abortion. And the student reviews were through the roof. We didn't solve any of those problems, and we didn't come out of the discussions with any consensus on any matter. But it was a profound educational experience. Everybody's views were altered slightly because they better understood the other side of an issue. The other thread that led to it, and the title was, from my undergraduate days, a mandatory course every senior had to take where I went to school up in New Hampshire at Dartmouth. And it was called Great Issues. And every Monday night, I think it was every Monday night, or was it Monday nights once a month, something like that. But I remember it was Monday nights. The university would bring in a third rail topic speaker. E.g. George Wallace was
Whoa.
one. And he or she would give a lecture, and it would be open to student questions, and it was ungraded, but attendance was taken, and you had to make X percentage of the great issues meetings in order to graduate. And I over the years, that was one of the best parts of my education. Is I was able to hear, as divergent voices as George Wallace, and it was a black civil, it may have been Malcolm X, in that as part of that series on third rail topics. So that's where the title came from. So I should give an attribution to the title.
I'm glad I asked, Bill. I heard about what you did in the seminar. I'd never heard about the Dartmouth lineage of it. That's part of the fun of these conversations, is you hear nuggets that you never heard before. So, all right, what's a great issue that's on your mind today?
There are two, and one might be considered frivolous, and one is as serious as it gets.
Okay.
My bracket is busted, and we're at war in Iran.
What's your take on the war in Iran, Bill?
We can't do the bracket busted?
Sure. Sure we can. Sure we can. What's up with your bracket? Why is it busted?
Well, I voted with my heart instead of my head. I love Kelvin Sampson as a coach. He's the coach of Houston. The quarterfinals were played in Houston. He's perennially got a great team, and I picked him to go all the way, and he got knocked out in the round of 16. So my bracket is busted.
Do you do a bracket?
Yesterday's game was another team I had was Duke, but my heart was with Connecticut. I voted with my head on Duke, and should have gone with my heart on Connecticut. My bracket is completely busted.
Do you put yourself through this painful exercise every year?
Yeah, absolutely.
And have for roughly how long?
I remember doing it with my father, and my father's been dead for 25 years, so maybe 25, 30 years.
Why do you love it?
Well, I love college basketball because the arenas, I can't say that all the time. I used to go to the Final Four every year when it was in real arenas. When they started moving it into these massive football stadiums that seat 70 or 100,000 people, I stopped. But I can remember going to it in Dallas in a place called Reunion Arena, and it sat maybe 10,000 people, and they were rabid fans. It wasn't like professional sports where there was just a bunch of rich people there watching the game, and they really cared, and the passion was there. That's what got it started. Did you ever bracket?
No. I was thinking as we were deciding upon this idea that some might say on the surface that you and I have no business having a great issues, it's not night currently, but a great issues conversation because, we're both white males from Pennsylvania. Some would say right of center, right? And then we don't disagree on anything. Why should we have this conversation? We disagree totally on this. I have never created a bracket. I take no enjoyment in it whatsoever. If you were to ask me to rank my favorite sports to the degree that I engage in sports, which is not a great degree, basketball will be at the bottom.
Really?
So,
Why?
yeah. Well, two things. One, as you know, I don't know that this is a disagreement as opposed to a difference in circumstance. I have 4 children. You do not have children. My 4 children are all female. There are many females who are interested in sports. Mine have, with no guidance from their parents, taken zero interest in sports. Also, I'll be married this year for 20 years. And when
Carissa,
yeah, thank you. When my wife Carissa, a Bucknellian, as you know, but not a student of Professor Gruver, and I got together, I watched a lot of sports. And I quickly realized, this may be where the 4 girls got it from, that she had no interest in such things. And I had a lot of interest in her. So my interests quickly shifted. And whereas pre-Carissa, I used to, for example, watch football every Sunday after church and watch a lot of hockey. I went to hockey games in Philadelphia as a kid. We can talk about that if you want. My wife's not interested in those things, and I'm a lot more interested in her and in our relationship than having my own interests. So I'm a semi-retired sports fan because I try to put my time where the people who are most important to me in my life want to put their time.
familial driver is something we have in common from opposite sides, however.
Right.
Joan is a much better athlete than me. And, her brother was an NFL quarterback. She's a competitive tennis player. And she really gets into, she picks a bracket too, and we compete. So that, where it would have been a division for you, it's a uniter for us.
Yes. And there, I guess at the values level, there is no disagreement, right? Put one's energy where it draws you closer to the people to whom you want to be closest.
Yeah.
And it may shift. I will say that was
one of the few things that my dad and I had in common too. So, yeah, it's an interesting twist. I didn't think of that, but that's probably why I'm still filling it out. Yeah.
When I was a kid, I played a little bit of hockey, watched a lot, played a little street hockey, not ice. I played street hockey, watched ice hockey.
Is that the Bobby Clark era of the Flyers?
Well, it depends what Bobby Clark era you want to get at. Not when he was a player. I'm too young for that. But when he was the GM, yes. And it's a common notion that a kid who grew up in Philly and likes hockey will be a Flyers fan. I'm not a Flyers fan. And I don't think there's so much work to be done in terms of, what we're trying to advance as it relates to the mission, that you and I don't talk a lot of sports. So it's fun that this gets to happen in this format. My hockey fanhood probably tells you everything you need to know about me. The first day of first grade, there was a kid who was being bullied on the playground. And I made a gut decision. I was thinking with my heart, not my head, that I don't like bullies, so this kid and I are going to be best friends. So we became best friends. And one of the first things, when you become best friends, especially in an instant, people start telling you interesting things about themselves. And this young man told me, one of the interesting things about me is I have a cousin who's a professional athlete. I said, that's fantastic. I don't have a cousin who's a professional athlete. Who's your cousin? If you're my best friend, I'm going to be his greatest fan. Well, my then best friend's cousin was from Flourtown, Pennsylvania. He was the greatest American hockey goalie of his era, perhaps of any era, number 35 for the New York Rangers, Mike Richter. I didn't know at that time in first grade that becoming a New York Rangers hockey fan growing up in the suburbs of Philadelphia was akin to signing your own death warrant. There were many first, second, third, fourth, and all the way through graders who attempted to have some non-civil discourse with me and changed my mind on this topic. You know me well enough, Bill, to know that that just made me a more and more and more ardent New York Rangers fan. So, yes, I have some memories of Bobby Clark, but they involve rooting against his team when he was GM. And by the way, it was a decent time. You were in New York at the time. It was a decent time to be a Rangers fan. It was in the run-up to '94 when they won the Stanley Cup for the first time in decades. Broke the 54-year drought.
I was a Devils fan.
What's that?
I was a Devils fan.
Okay, Martin Brodeur. Yeah. But even there, I'm mostly retired as a hockey fan, just because right now that's not where my kids' intensity is.
Your story on the playground reminds me of I have a friend. I'll name him, Glenn Sank, who now lives in the UK. Was a CEO of a very successful company and still very successful businessman. He and I were on a board together and got to know each other, had similar values. And he had a similar playground incident. I think it may have been first grade or second grade, but when you're 6 or 7, however old. And Glenn was getting bullied on the playground, and this bigger guy came in and basically took his side and became his best friend. Now they're married, and I think it's a wonderful story.
Yeah.
I mean, a wonderful story that Glenn met his life partner on the playground when this guy came in and had the values, and he didn't know Glenn from Adam.
Wow.
And he didn't. It was clearly the right thing to do, and they bonded. So
very neat. Yeah. Wow. That's my story on why I don't have a bracket, Bill.
Okay. So Iran. Where do you want to start?
You're the leadership guy. What's your view of our country's leadership on this issue right now?
Well, I'm also the military guy in this conversation.
We'll get there.
From a military leadership perspective, it's a fascinating study. There are two classical military strategists that have schools of thought that have been built up around the philosophies that they first articulated. One is Karl von Clausewitz, who was a Prussian who gained his military experience in the Napoleonic Wars, and the other is the perhaps mythical Chinese strategist Sun Tzu. And they're either over time, both schools of thought have been successful, but they're very different. And in the Iran conflict, we see them both represented. President Trump is very much Clausewitzian. Clausewitz was all about something he called coup d'oeil. That's a French word. My French accent is terrible. Something like COUPD''OEIL, which translates loosely in English into instinct. And the key to military leadership is instinct, having a leader who has coup d'oeil, who just knows what's right and what should be done. And another element of Clausewitz's philosophy is to identify your own center of gravity, a Newtonian physics term, and identify your enemy's center of gravity, and where possible, use your center of gravity to destroy the enemy's center of gravity. No futzing around, go right after it. Sun Tzu, on the other hand, is very rational, very methodical. Combat as a last resort, and use of force multipliers like alliances. Can you say Houthis? Can you say Hezbollah? About deception. Can you say breaking prior agreements? So Iran is following a very classic Sun Tzu approach to the war, and America is following a very Clausewitzian approach to the war. And we'll see. I think the outcome will be determined by another principle that Clausewitz identified called the Trinity, borrowing from Christian theology. And Clausewitz's Trinity said to be successful at war, a country needs its military, its government, and its people, all in harmony. In harmony, where three is one, much like the religious Trinity. And America, since the Second World War, has had trouble keeping that harmony in the Trinity for any length of time. So, and the Iranians have learned from, I think you can trace the Iranian MO back to Mikhail Gorbachev and Deng Xiaoping and the Chinese, who were lifting a lot of the economic restrictions in China at the time. Gorbachev was lifting the economic and social restrictions in the then Soviet Union. The Chinese learned that you can't do both. You have to keep, if you're going to keep the party in power, whether it be the Islamic fanatics or whether it be the Chinese communists, you've got to be ruthless in suppressing dissent. And I think the Iranians learned from that, and there's no effective opposition. So that third leg of the Trinity, the people, have no leadership. They've all been killed or put in jail. So they are able, and I think the Chinese have learned from it. I think the Iranians have learned from it. I think the Russians, Putin has learned from it, to be ruthless in order to force your Trinity to stay together. And we live in a democracy and in a world where information is ubiquitous. It's much harder to keep your Trinity together in that type of a society than it is in an authoritarian one.
And it seems like that's the Iranians' bet, is we can't keep our Trinity together for very long, and we'll give up like America's done before.
Yep.
Is your money on America?
And President Trump is clearly influenced by what he calls forever wars.
Mm-hmm.
Iran is 4 times bigger than Iraq.
Yep.
It's roughly the size of the state of Alaska. In Iraq, which didn't end well for us, it wasn't a catastrophe, and that's a whole other. I think the Iraq War was a better initiative than most people give it credit for. But anyway, we had 250,000 troops in Iraq, and we couldn't come away from that with a clear victory. So a country 4 times as large geographically and 90 million people we'd have to send half the U.S. Army over there, and to just send the equivalent number of troops. And since it's 4 times larger, we'd have to send all the Army and the Marines and call up the National Guard to have that kind of force projection. So people who are worried about a ground war, I mean, that's never going to happen because we just don't have enough soldiers to get it done. So my bet is it will end, but I think it's going to be another case where the Iranians are in total war. They'll do anything. We're in limited war, and we and the Israelis, unfortunately, are going to have to periodically go back in, and anytime they get their military build up where it could become a threat, either through nuclear or missiles or proxies. This will be every 5 years, we might have another Iranian conflict.
So you think we're going to have to go in every now and then and flush this crap, is what you're saying? We're not going to be able to eliminate the threat. It's going to grow back, and this will be a cycle.
Because they're authoritarians, they're fanatics.
Yeah.
Death doesn't scare them. What scares them is
they think it's a favor.
Yeah.
I mean, in their theology, like we're doing them something good.
Yeah. And being out of power, however, and sitting in a prison, Guantanamo or someplace, that's hell to them.
Yes.
So why should they surrender?
Yeah. If you were President Trump in 2026, or if it was President Gruver in 2026, would you have gone in?
I don't know what he knew. Let me say that up.
Of course.
Front.
Yep.
My initial answer to that 4 weeks ago would have been no. But when Iran hit Diego Garcia with a missile at roughly 4,000 kilometers, whoa, that was a game changer. We didn't think we thought their missiles were limited to 2,000 kilometers, which is a problem for Israel, but not a problem for France or Germany or the UK. When they demonstrated they had that kind of power, that may have changed my calculus.
You said, Bill, that you think the Iraq war was a better project than most people think. I'm sure that you remember that was when you and I met when I was an undergraduate, and I was quite vocal as a campus activist at Bucknell University at that time in support of the war. I'll be the first to say I've had a lot of second thoughts about my stances on that particular issue since then. I'd love to hear why you said what you said earlier in terms of it was a better endeavor than most people give it credit for.
If people lose context, you don't, because you were at a pivotal point in your life, your late teens, early 20s, when 9/11 happened. And President George Bush II, he was more of a Sun Tzu kind of military leader. And his primary duty was to keep the American people safe. And if the enemy is able to fly, basically guided missiles, guided by human pilots into planes, into buildings, what was next? So his objective was to keep the homeland safe. Now, he did that. He formed the Department of Homeland Security and did things like that. Very methodical, step-by-step kind of Sun Tzu thing. But he also believed in force multipliers like Sun Tzu which is in war you don't want to play home games. You want to play away games. So by invading Iraq, and you might remember Saddam said this will be the mother of all wars, and he invited Islamic extremists from around the world to come to Iraq to repel the great Satan. Bush shifted the playing field. The Islamic terrorist focus moved away from the U.S. homeland to a country in the Middle East where we had few vital interests. So, it was tragic. It probably lasted too long, but the initial thought I thought was brilliant. It was very Sun Tzu.
You won't be surprised to know that I've never heard that argument before, and that's part of why I and many other students respect Professor Gruver, and also part of why I think these conversations are fruitful. I'll throw one other Professor Gruverism at you. As you know, I'm moonlighting this semester as a Bucknell instructor or professor or adjunct or whatever the right academic term is. And my students have noticed that I'm prone to playing devil's advocate. I had a professor back in my day who did that very well. So if I were going to devil's advocate against what you said about Iran, aren't there other ways we could stop a missile aimed at Europe? You and I have had positive conversations about President Reagan. He was the one who said, let's build missile defense systems. Isn't there a better, cheaper way to stop the threat that changed your mind to Europe than what President Trump is doing right now?
There are less hostile ways to do it, certainly. But one of the things that's going to impact our Trinity is we're running out of those defensive missiles, the surface-to-air missiles now. The Israelis are running out of them. So when you've got an enemy whose whole economy is devoted to warfare like Iran's is, I don't know if the passive defensive will be enough. And it's certainly not enough for a Clausewitz who believes you have to take out your enemy's center of gravity.
Yeah.
If we had a Sun Tzu president, that would have been the approach. But a Clausewitzian president thinks that's a waste of time, that inevitably you'll have to get it done, and it only gets worse with time, so go get the center of gravity.
Okay, you mentioned the economy, Bill. You mentioned the Iranian economy. Any reasonable observer would say that there's been an effect on the American economy of this war. You used to work on Wall Street. I see some panic coming out of Wall Street these days. I hear people kvetching about gas prices. What about that? Haven't we just hurt ourselves? President Trump says America first. Well, aren't we putting America last here? We're bailing Israel out by ruining our own economy.
The American economy is incredibly strong. We're at least temporarily hurting the American economy. It's not so much gas prices. I'm more worried about fertilizer prices than I am gas prices. But I think President Bush's mistake post 9/11 is he didn't ask the American people to sacrifice.
That's a Grooverism I've heard before.
And he by not asking for that sacrifice from the third leg of the Trinity, he weakened the Trinity, weakened the harmony of the Trinity. My advice to President Trump right now would be to to identify with the sacrifice that the American people are making, even those who aren't sending their sons or daughters into combat, by paying higher gas prices, at least temporarily. That's your contribution to the war effort. If you go back to the Second World War, President Roosevelt financed a lot of the war by selling war bonds. And I can remember my dad and mom, they any excess savings they had went into war bonds. And and it was their patriotic duty.
It does feel like history is repeating itself in that regard, Bill. One other devil's advocate question. You talked about how, in your mind, we have to take these weapons out in Iran because they can reach Europe, but the regime's not going to get dislodged. This infection will come back, and we're going to have to go in and disinfect it again. A lot of what you heard during the prior era, 9/11 and all that, was America fomented this Islamic radicalism by the things that we did or didn't do in the Middle East. Basically, we pissed them off, and then they got mad, and then they hit us. What do you say to the argument that by hitting Iran but not going all the way and dislodging the regime, we're going to just stir up the hornet's nest worse? They're going to hate us even more. They're going to try to kill us even harder, and in the long run, it'll be worse that the president did what he did.
It's a risk, but you have to understand Islam, two branches of Islam. And Iran is different. They're Shia Islamists, and the Saudis and the people across the Straits of Hormuz in the UAE and Oman, they're all Sunnis. So it could fall the other way too. You could have the Sunni Islamists become closer to us because we're lessening the threat of the infidels in that misunderstood branch of Islam. To them, they think the Shias don't properly interpret Muhammad. So, yeah, there are risks. Leadership is about making choices. And, President Trump made a choice. High stakes. I just wish he'd get the American people. And there's been no Oval Office address. There's no identity with the sacrifice that the American people are making by paying higher prices. He's very good at honoring the troops who fall, but that's not the Trinity. That's the military end of the
right.
Third of the Trinity. It's not the people.
Yeah, and that's part of what I wonder, Bill, is I think a lot of people would say the reason he's not doing that is he sucks at it. That he's obnoxious, he's this, he's that, he's not a persuasive communicator. They'd say a less charitable version of your Clausewitz thing. He just does what his gut tells him and tweets and whatever. And there's a lot of truth to that. What I wonder is, can any president do that in the way that you remember from presidents decades ago? Even, in the class that I'm co-teaching right now, studying Reagan and looking at his persuasive and inspirational communication. In a country that is as polarized as we are in terms of our views of the president and our views of what's the right thing to do, but also in terms of how when you were my professor, people didn't do this. There were not video podcasts. There were a few news channels that everybody watched. So I honestly wonder, although we put the president on a pedestal, to what degree can he, or in the future she, truly move public opinion, truly lead the country in the way that you and I, although we're different vintage, both remember to what degree is part of the reason that President Trump isn't doing that, him and the kind of person he is, versus the fact that we just live in a different country where for any president, it's massively more difficult to do that? Or maybe it's both. What do you think, Bill?
I don't think it's necessarily more difficult for any president. What's difficult, if not impossible in today's system, is for such a person to get elected.
I can't play devil's advocate on that, Bill. I'm afraid that I must confess that you've nailed it.
Yeah, you to get elected, you have to play to the base. And look, I can name Democrats and I can name Republicans who I would much prefer to be in that Oval Office right now or in 28. But I don't think any of them have a prayer of getting elected because they don't play well with their bases. They don't play strong enough with their bases.
Yes, that would certainly be one of the things I've taken away from a couple of decades in policy and politics is the skills that we would like to see in governing are totally different than the skills that are needed in order to get elected. And in our system, you can't govern unless you get elected. And you nailed it. Bill, this has been a delightful maiden voyage. We covered 2 issues. There are others, but I think we both have to get back to work. I think we should do this again, and I think we should bring friends. So thank you for pioneering the idea in your seminar and for bringing it online. Let's do it again.
Aye. A pleasure.
Thanks again for listening to the Open Discourse podcast. This podcast is brought to you through the generosity of the Shearer Group of Companies in State College, Pennsylvania. If you'd like to keep it going, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and consider making a donation at opendiscoursecoalition.org/donate. See you next week.